All right, there we go.
Okay, great. Just do it from here. Is that?
Whatever you're more comfortable for you, man.
No.
You want me to get you a little table or something?
No. I mean, I'm fine right here. I just want to see if you have.
Just get on the floors and let him sit on your back.
All right. So, good evening, everyone. So, yeah, we're here from the Office of Cannabis Management with the County of Los Angeles, and really just here to. We've been doing a lot of outreach recently since like about mid-July. To talk about the county's proposed program for commercial cannabis businesses. So we have a pretty long presentation, but we're gonna try to get through it as quickly as possible. And just kind of talk like at a high level, but generally what we typically cover is like some background on like state and local regulations, the overview of like the proposed program and some of the operating requirements as well as the zoning requirements for this program. And some of the permit application requirements that are being proposed, and how all this is going to be actually enforced, and how compliance is going to be enforced. So, just a little bit about us. Once again, from the Office of Cannabis Management, our main role is to really try to help coordinate the county's transition to a regulated market. There's several departments involved with that, so we're kind of like a coordinating body. So we'll do as best we can. Yeah, for some reason the slides aren't
There we go.
fully moving. Okay.
Now you're jumping.
So, some of the proposed kind of objectives of this program to ensure health and safety of of cannabis consumers. To promote the well-being of communities and to support a regulated local industry. So really quickly, just kind of a quick overview of the state regulatory framework to give folks an idea of how commercial cannabis is regulated throughout the state. So really, it's all regulated through a big intertwinement of like state laws, state regulations, and then local ordinances. So it gives, although commercial cannabis was legalized in 2016, each individual jurisdiction, city, and county still has the autonomy, I guess you could say, to kind of regulate what commercial cannabis looks like in their community, or if they're going to regulate it at all. Mostly for local jurisdictions, it comes down to like regulating the time, the place, and the manner in which these businesses operate. And then another big thing is that local jurisdictions can impose additional taxes to these businesses. So I guess a little bit more. So in order to open a commercial cannabis business, it requires a dual licensing structure, right? And like I said, a lot of jurisdictions throughout the state have chosen to keep cannabis prohibited. So that's the map that you see here. Where everything that's lit up in like red or orange, those are places, counties that still prohibit it, and in green are all the places that still allow it. But generally, they could outright completely prohibit all cannabis. They could choose to regulate only some type of businesses, or they can choose to just regulate all types of cannabis businesses, which we'll go over like what different types of businesses there are in this industry and market. So actually, just so it's been a long road to kind of get to this point since commercial cannabis was first approved at the state level. That it started. I know some people here might be familiar. It started. The county started shortly after the legalization at the state level to begin figuring out how commercial cannabis could be regulated in unincorporated areas of the county. So OCM was created. Built out a regulatory framework that was developed through extensive community stakeholder feedback, and then developed a plan, a regulatory framework that was submitted to the board. However, no action at that time was taken. And it kind of just stayed like that for until 2022, early 2022, when the board decided to revisit this and task the Office of Cannabis Management with kind of revising, looking at like what other jurisdictions have done, and seeing how things can change and how the original regulatory framework can kind of be improved and changed. And also to include the development of a social equity program. Since then, one of the big things that has passed is a local tax. It was called Measure C, and it was on the ballot in November 2022. It passed with about 60% of voters voting yes on that. And then that takes us to July and today, where we've been doing a lot of outreach. We've been developing ordinances that would kind of determine how this program could be could be regulated, and then doing outreach to the community to present these proposed rules and get some feedback to ensure that we're building out a program that is responsive to communities' needs and concerns. So it was approved back in that February 2022 board motion, where the board approved pretty much OCM to kind of move forward with the development and implementation of the program. Several things. So a total of 90 permits were approved, or essentially establishing a cap of 90 permits across 6 different business activities. Oh. There we go. So those 90 permits are 25 retail permits, 25 delivery permits, and 10 of everything else. 10 manufacturing, cultivation, 10 distribution, and 10 testing businesses. They also allowed for micro businesses. They said that retail and delivery could be allowed in commercial and manufacturing zones. They approved a 600-foot buffer from sensitive uses like schools, daycares, public parks, and public libraries. Also approved a phased implementation, meaning that all 90 licenses aren't going to drop at once. It's going to be rolled out in a phased approach, most likely with retail and delivery, and then phasing in the other types after that. And then the development, as I mentioned, of a social equity program. So a quick, actually, is this you? Yeah. So I'll hand it off to my colleague Albert, who will cover the next part.
Awesome. So we're gonna go over right now some local codes about what's in the county code right now, and also what's to come. So if you look at right now, so Title 4 is our revenue finance, so that's where the tax measure lives. That was passed. So Title 8 right now, there's some information about cannabis right now, but the important thing about Title 8 is in the future, our future ordinance is going to live there. That's like kind of like our regulations for cannabis businesses. In Title 22, that's our planning and zoning code. Right now, it's all prohibited within the unincorporated areas. So that's obviously going to change as well. You're going to see it later on in this presentation where cannabis businesses can be established according to like the different uses. And so there's also a fire code, which is fire department regulation number 30. So right now, there are pretty much cannabis permitting through there, but that's like through contract cities. So from like city of LA or city like Culver, they go to our fire department and they get their cannabis sign off from them in terms of everything related to fire though. So moving on from that.
Oh, there's trigger.
Okay. So moving on from make it answer. Make it answer.
Well, we're talking about Title 22. We just did our community standards districts that included cannabis, did not.
They wouldn't let us put it in there.
Oh, they wouldn't let us put it in.
Yeah.
Never mind. My bad.
No, all good.
I apologize.
Let me just try to get those right slides going.
Frozen.
Okay, so talking about health and safety measures, so pretty much we're talking about like where advertising is prohibited. If you're familiar with state law, this is all very familiar. So it can't be advertising on any like interstate or highway. It can't be in unincorporated residential or agricultural zones. The reason why agriculture was there is zone planning has kind of told us that like agricultural is like has a lot of residential components to it. So we're not going to allow advertising there. Also 1,000 feet from any youth-oriented use. So how we define that, that's like schools, K-12, public libraries, public parks, recreational facilities, daycare centers that are in residential and also in commercial zones. It can't be on delivery vehicles for safety of people that are operating them. And an exception is it can be on the premise of the cannabis business. Also, cannabis can't be visible from outside the store. And also there's a split between the different districts. So there's 5 retail, 5 delivery, and each supervised district, so that it kind of eliminates like we're only going to go to SD1 to get our cannabis. Next slide, we're going to talk about some health and safety measures. So there's an odor management plan, that's with public health, also waste management plan. There's track and trace from the state that's mandated from like, so you can pretty much know where you get your cannabis from and who grew it. There's recall procedures that are gonna be required, so pretty much the state usually tackles recalls, but pretty much they need to show us that they know how to like have adequate procedures for that. There are gonna be packaging requirements that are very similar to the state as well, and also labeling, so it can't be like looking like children's candies or anything like that. And it has to be, talking about telling the THC and CBD content as well.
So before you move on, can you just give us an example of what a recalled item would be for some of us that don't know? Like, why would they
Sure.
recall?
Sure, so so sometimes it could be like they found through additional testing that a product, say like an edible product, had contamination. Maybe it was contaminated with another edible or something like that, and so maybe the THC percentage is off or something. So a recall could be initiated by the state, and then so what retail locations, manufacturers, what they have to do is send it back and then pull it off stores and stuff, and then also find, like for retailers, they probably have some kind of contact list of who bought it and then like share it with them as well.
Okay, cool.
We get security measures. So for security measures, also very familiar with the state, there's a limited access area. What we call limited access area is pretty much where cannabis is stored, pretty much, and only certain people are allowed in that area. So that'll be one of the requirements. There's gonna be age verification. So obviously you have to be over 21, or if you're under 21, you have to be like a qualified patient for medical cannabis. There's also video surveillance that's required 24/7, lock and alarm system. So we're not talking about like a neighborhood ring or something like that. It has to be like a sophisticated alarm system, and also like a commercial grade lock. Security guards are going to be required for pretty much retail locations, at least one. And then lighting has to be down facing. Can't be shining into like your neighbors or anything like that. And then there's going to be signage requirements, telling them like 21 and over what kind of dispensary this is, and also who is allowed inside as well. So one other thing we also have is a good neighbor policy. So I'm kind of think of this like kind of like an extension of the security measure. So there's going to be community meetings. So anyone that's trying to create a cannabis store or any kind of business, they're in the permitting process. They're going to have to conduct a community meeting. And so that's going to be, they're going to have to like notify people within 500 feet of their premise, and for a minimum of 10 days, and provide translation services as well. So this is kind of really to meet the community, kind of see what the community's needs are, and also like what their concerns are, and then they have some way to address that as well. There's also going to be a community liaison. So usually we see as the owner of like the store, they should be able 24/7. So pretty much if you have any complaints or you want someone directly that you can talk to from the cannabis store or business, you can contact that person. Not to say we don't want to hear about any complaints. We want to hear about that as well. That's also going to go into like the renewal process as well. But there's someone direct that the community can contact. And then, so also businesses are going to have a corporate social responsibility. We're going to call it CSR for short. So there's 3 categories they can pick between: community, social equity, labor, and employee relations. Some kind of component related to that. So CSRs are something that these applicants are going to have to pick, and then by the time of renewal, they have to complete these kind of CSRs. And so if they don't complete the CSRs, it's also subject to renewal, so they may not get renewed depending on how much they did or if they did it or not. Going on, so there's also going to be another component called local and targeted hires. So 20% of all work must be done by a local hire and also by a targeted hire. How there's defined is going to be defined in our ordinance, but pretty much people under the federal poverty line that live within the area and are experiencing certain needs. So pretty much businesses that want to apply, they can make their application more attractive by committing more CSRs.
Alright, so now I'm gonna just start to cover some of the proposed zoning regulations. So these zoning regulations would be included in Title 22. in Title 22 of the zoning code, or the county zoning code. And just to kind of reiterate, and I'm sure you all are familiar, there are currently no legal cannabis businesses in the unincorporated areas of the county. So some of the key priorities for the cannabis zoning regulations are to establish a land use for permitting requirements for allowed cannabis businesses, as well as to create a ministerial permitting process that only allows businesses that fully comply with county code and state law. Non-compliant businesses would not be permitted. And well, of course, one of the other priorities is to protect the communities and potential adverse effects and nuisances that may come from some of these businesses. So just kind of to reiterate like some of the different allowable business activities in the proposed zoning code. We have 6 different types of businesses. So you have the retail storefront businesses or dispensaries as they're often referred to. Delivery only businesses would also be allowable under this zoning ordinance. Distribution businesses that really just like move cannabis from like one business to another. Testing laboratories. So Chris, you mentioned like recalls and things like that. Those often stem from testing, right? They test the products, they find something, and if there's something that's like out of a normal range, then they'll issue like a recall for those things, right? Based off the testing. And manufacturing businesses, they would allow, proposing to allow both non-volatile and volatile manufacturing, and cultivation businesses. And cultivation businesses and micro businesses, which is like at least 3 cannabis activities. So at least 3 of these different types of activities, pretty much all occurring in under the same roof, at the same business premises. What wouldn't be allowed under this proposed program is events and consumption lounges. So cannabis businesses would only be permitted in commercial and industrial and some institutional zones. Really institutional would be reserved for only testing businesses, and we'll see that, and some mixed use zones. Mixed use zones that some mixed use zones would be allowed, but only commercial only mixed use zones. If there's retail, I mean a residential, a residence on a property, on a mixed use property, it wouldn't be allowable in those types of zones. So it'd be commercial only mixed use zones. So this is, I want to make sure this one comes out right because this is an important slide. This is this proposed zoning table for commercial zones. So this is so retail storefronts, which I think is really the most visible type of business, would be allowable in C2 zones, C3 zones, general commercial, commercial manufacturing zones, and commercial only mixed use zones. The no cultivation would be allowed in commercial zones. Distribution only in commercial manufacturing zones, and then retail delivery only would be allowable in all commercial zones, all these commercial zones as well, C2, C3, and CN. Now, in terms of industrial or institutional zones, make sure this one comes out. Just want to make sure. I don't know why it does that. Okay. So for industrial institutional zones, and what we mean are like light manufacturing zones M1, restricted heavy manufacturing M1.5, and heavy manufacturing M2. So those areas would be more designated for like cultivation, distribution, the volatile manufacturing, as well as the non-volatile manufacturing. Testing would be allowed potentially in all of these zones. Retail storefronts in M1 zones. Retail non-storefronts or delivery businesses would be allowed in all industrial zones that listed here. So M1, M1.5, and M2, as well as micro businesses. So some other provisions included in the zoning ordinance are related to buffer zones. So I mentioned earlier, the board approved 600-foot buffer. So buffered around these youth-oriented uses or wrong slide. Okay. Buffered around youth-oriented uses, which include schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, daycares, parks and recreation centers, and libraries. Another buffer that was proposed or being proposed in order to prevent like an over concentration in certain communities is a 500-foot buffer between existing licensed retail storefronts. So even if it's so really to kind of prevent like a clustering of businesses in any one area. Some additional proposed zoning regulations include so indoor businesses only, so no outdoor or mixed light cultivation like greenhouses. Businesses would have to be located in permanent structures, so no new development would be permitted under this proposed ordinance. However, that is something we've been discussing a lot because we've received some feedback around like no new development and potentially only allowing existing structures. And then premises must be kept clean, free of graffiti, trash, and any debris. So that's the sort of the quick overview of zoning and where businesses could be allowed to locate. Now the last section we kind of wanted to go over here is just to give a sense of like what it really takes for an applicant to, what does the process look like? What are all the requirements that an applicant would have to meet to receive their local approval? It's a pretty extensive process. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds of it, but
I saw what you did there.
So it would start with an application submitted to the Office of Cannabis Management. OCM would review things like ownership disclosures, various corporate formation documents, and also conduct background checks on the ownership and proposed owners. From there, the next step would be to find a compliant business location that meets all of the zoning and buffer requirements that we just went over. And then depending on the type of build out that a business might be doing, they have to get other permits from other departments like the public health department, the planning department for land use approvals, public works department for like any building and safety tenant improvements that they might be doing. Fire department for like their fire safety systems and all those things. They'll be doing various on-site inspections and have to undergo that. OCM will also do an initial inspection prior to issuing a permit or license, as well as an annual inspection each year after that. I mentioned earlier, it's a dual licensing process, right? So they would also have to obtain their a state license in order to gain their local approval. Permits would have to be renewed annually. And a big part of this to ensure that there is no nuisance and that all these businesses are in compliance with all the proposed rules and regulations would be ongoing monitoring and compliance. So OCM will continue to coordinate with the relevant agencies as well as accept, review, and then investigate any public complaints against businesses.
Real quick, just clarification. So dual licensing, who gets filed first, the OCM or with the county, or does the state get filed first? Who do they start first with?
They should start with OCM first.
Okay.
They should start with OCM first, and then once they hit kind of like a certain point where they're ready, they could go on to the state. Ideally, once they have a location and it looks like they're likely to be approved by the county.
Cool.
So I mentioned ownership disclosures and the need for background checks. The main reason for that is because not necessarily everybody or anybody would be allowed to be an owner. There are some certain prohibitions if a person has or proposed owner has certain felony convictions on their record, like a violent felony, a serious violent felony, some serious felony, felony involving fraud, deceit, embezzlement, theft, or perjury. selling drugs or to minors, a felony involving drug trafficking, or a felony conviction after February 15, 2022, which is when the board approved this this program. A couple other prohibitions are the business has to be incorporated inside the United States. Anybody who's like in government and has served for the past 3 years in any capacity regulating or enforcing cannabis laws also would not be allowed. If they lie on their application and the county finds out, they could lose their license, or potential other violations of county laws related to wage theft, labor discrimination, or other worker protection programs. And home stretch here. So we've gone over a bunch of rules, a bunch of proposed rules. So want to go over some of the tools that the county would utilize to ensure compliance. So first and foremost would be, along with the launch of this program, would be establishing kind of like a complaint portal where complaints could be submitted anonymously or not anonymously, and those could be investigated, reviewed by the Office of Cannabis Management or the appropriate agency that might be that it would be relevant to. Inspections, I mentioned inspections, so various agencies, various departments would do inspections upon like their first permit issuance, or in the case of the Office of Cannabis Management, an annual inspection. Also, Public Health Department would conduct 1 or 2 annual inspections. And then any penalties for violations of any one of these rules. There's going to be a variety of penalties that could range from just a notice to correct to a fine, or something more severe like a suspension of the license or permit, or a revocation, a complete revocation of the license. So the severity of the severity of the penalty will be depending on like the frequency of violations as well as the severity of the violation. And the OCM will be the main department really empowered to issue these notices, fines, potentially product recalls, or revoke and suspend permits. There will be, of course, an appeal process for businesses through an administrative hearing process, but they wouldn't be appealable to the Board of Supervisors. And then almost last. Just want to make sure everybody understands, everybody knows how to report an illegal business. I know that's a problem. It's been a problem out here over the years. So there's various ways to report it. One is just using the Works app. There's among other things, you can use that to report illegal cannabis grows or dispensaries, or just send us an email, cannabis@lacounty.gov. Or the LA County Sheriff's Department. They have an email inbox specifically for this, which is marijuanatips@lasd.org. And then finally, just a quick timeline. So this is an estimated timeline. It could always change, but this is kind of what we're tracking to right now. So this summer, we're doing a lot of this community engagement, as I mentioned at the top. We discussed like 2 different ordinances, right? One is Title 8, which is kind of like our application process, operating requirements, all of those things. And we anticipate that kind of being routed to the board. All these things have to be approved by the board and adopted by the Board of Supervisors. And we anticipate that happening around fall of this year. We're also conducting a program environmental impact report that will really help kind of streamline how these businesses are established and ensure that they're in compliance with environmental laws in the state. We anticipate that will be in full swing by winter 2024, or by this winter. And then the Title 22 ordinance, which is the zoning part of this, we anticipate that kind of taking longer than the Title 8, because that runs concurrently with the environmental ordinance, or the environmental review. And the environmental review is a pretty heavy lift. It's going to take a while to do that. It's a pretty robust environmental analysis, and these two just kind of inform each other, the zoning and the environmental review. So that first has to go in front of the Planning Commission before it goes up to and approved by the Planning Commission before it goes up to the Board of Supervisors. So long process. We anticipate it getting to the board around summer 2025 next year. And yeah, that's kind of what the timeline looks like at this point. So I know it's a lot of information, trying to get through it as quickly as we could, but wanna make sure, I know you have, some questions for us, so let's,
I have a few for you.
okay.
I read the ordinance. I think it was last week when I looked at it a little different. I talked with a couple other community members too. Is there anybody here in the audience that has any questions or comments or concerns? I got my list here. So, my first comment is your zoning allows 0 dispensaries or any type of business allowed in this town. Over 70% of this town voted yes for recreational. Over the last 5 years, especially the last 2, we had to face all the illegal grows. And because lack of a market, a regulated market. There's people here buying pot, they love it, they want to smoke it. We would like to make sure that we can get our piece of the pie. And what I mean by that is our school district would get tax dollars from it. Our kids right here. So all these people who do they would get the chunk. Right now, we probably have 6 or 7 people that sell pot out of their garage here in town. And most people know each other, so it's more like a collector, not selling. But there's a couple people in town who none of us know. And they're selling to people from Palmdale, from Lake LA, or other parts of the Antelope Valley, and they're coming here to buy it just from a garage. Are they up to good or no good? I don't know. We don't know because it's not regulated. So fast forward this timeline to 2025, and the supervisor is like, sweet, we're moving forward ahead with cannabis. I like to say here publicly, we're not moving forward. Now, a lot of these little steps towards like making sure the businesses should be secured and all that, that's great movement forward like that. But as for a zoning issue, the county's 2 separate pieces. You have everybody on that side of the mountain, which is a good 9.5, 10 million people. And then we only have 500,000 on this side. All these people work over there. A lot of them do, and some come this way. So the concern is, because of the volume of people, those 90 licenses that you guys are going to issue, if we're not, let's just say we see one of each kind. 6 of them, I think you said, 6 different businesses. There's no way possible for any of those 6 businesses to supply this half of the county. It's impossible. We all know that. And to keep thinking that we're only going to issue 90 permits is a realistic goal with no, we're going to hit 180 by year 2 or 360 by year 3. Like, I haven't heard any of that. So when I see your regulations that you guys are proposing, once again, our town will receive 0 of anything. We don't have a manufacturing area that's even developed at all. It's all across the highway. And we don't want huge warehouse. It's in our CSD. Many community members came up, fought very hard that our buildings aren't going to exceed 35 feet. You're stuck at 30. So these regulations, whoever came up with them, it might work for Los Angeles or Altadena or all the areas around. And I know not actually LA, but unincorporated LA on that side of the mountain. So we have 2 cultures here. We have a rural environment and an urban environment. And there should be a plan that reflects that. I'm going to ask, you guys said you had 20 meetings or X amount of meetings of community engagement this summer. But the communities that you're in, I guess my first question would be, did you verify if their district voted yes? And if they did vote yes, will your regulations fit in their community? I can answer the second one, it's no.
Yeah.
But the first one,
I mean, in terms of like who voted for what, we didn't have that, like that data, like to kind of like, what's the word? kind of like disaggregate by like each district. I mean, we did know that about like 65% of like LA County, I believe, voted for Proposition 64. 60% of the county voted yes on Measure C in 2022, which established like the general business tax in the unincorporated areas. But I can't say I have the data like offhand for this district.
Okay, because I think that would have been valuable to realizing which communities would really like it. Second, you guys have zoning for manufacturing, which we said we have none. Our retail stores are all on this side. We used to have a bunch of pot shops in town. And they actually work. They have a security guard and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying any bit of their legal business was good because once again, our kids didn't get their cut. And we don't know what they were selling. So, but that's for a retail business. That should never be in the manufacturing zone. Especially if people are manufacturing in big trucks. Our biggest concern in this town is trucks. We have a lot of people that die on this highway. So having small cars going into a manufacturing area is just not a good idea, especially out here. Maybe over there it might work because you got manufacturing right across the street from the 7-Eleven, which there's a Starbucks right on the other corner. That could totally work. But here it doesn't work because our manufacturing areas, when we do have them, if they are developed, they're going to be for bigger trucks. We have a lot of big vehicles. So having people going to go buy pot, hey man, let's go get a bud. And we're going to send them into a manufacturing area when all they're doing is a retail activity. So that's a big major safety concern right there. Now for growing, you guys only want to allow indoor grows. I'll admit it, I smoke and I don't care what people think. I'm a good man, I do good stuff, but I will not touch anything indoor because I don't play God and anyone else shouldn't either. It's fake light. You had to have chemical after chemical. That's the reason why you guys have to test most of this stuff because it's so dirty. Indoor growing is the dirtiest way to grow cannabis. So dual light, sun, there would be a way for, of course, there would be a way in ag land. Now, the biggest concern is a lot of community members don't want a big pot farm next to their house. And I agree. We could all have our 6 and that's enough for us to overcome our smell between each other. So right here in the middle of town. But like, for example, in our area, we have a lot of A2 and we have a lot of A land that's undeveloped, no neighbors. Have you guys thought about creating a new zone that is for growing outdoors? I think that would easily solve any complications in 5th district. Because you guys don't want to say A1 or A2 because then it's going to be a free-for-all because everybody out here is A1, A2. And you know, the other 45% might not want that. And hey, I don't want it. There's no reason. So maybe a new zone that might be able to allow an A1 and A2 or undeveloped areas that would allow to create a dual light. And the reason why I bring up dual light or natural light greenhouse, isn't the county's mission to reduce its emissions, its global impact, its carbon footprint? But yet we're going to tell people that they need to go and put up a building, add all this concrete, more greenhouse gas, all these things. That policy right there goes against the climate goals of the county. So why would we go backwards? So that's another concern when it comes to growing. A lot of people didn't have a problem with all of the greenhouses out here. They had a problem with all the illegal greenhouses, the guns, and the non-regulated part of it. It was just, there's stuff everywhere. There's no format. There was no zone. It was just kind of wherever. And that's not what we're asking for. We need a spot so all the people in Antelope Valley can buy their stuff. And they can do it regulated, the taxes. There could be safety patrols, whatever that needs to be implemented for an actual grow. So these are some of the things that the community members have brought up. But no way in shape we're asking to blow up our whole town and have A1. That's not the goal, and I don't think anyone here in El Valley wants that. Otherwise, this whole half would be really green, and then everyone over there would just become weird to take stuff. I don't know. The other thing that brought up was.
So before you,
Go ahead.
so I do want to kind of respond to some of those. So we work very closely with the planning department. Like they're the zone, they're in charge of the zoning, right? So we work very closely with them to kind of land on some of these proposed zones. So just to kind of like touch on a few of the things you're mentioning. So greenhouses were definitely like a consideration early on. However, when we were discussing what can go where, one of the things that the planners familiar with the Antelope Valley mentioned is that, well, agricultural zones are functionally residential out here, right? It's pretty much like one and the same. So if the only zone where a greenhouse would be appropriate is like an agricultural zone, right? But to get rid of the agricultural zones, it kind of ended up, then the greenhouses didn't make so much sense. Although to your question earlier, like if there was any discussion about creating a new zone, that wasn't discussed. That wasn't necessarily that's the first time I even hear that, to be honest. So that's an interesting interesting thought, right? And then I know when we talked yesterday, we talked a little bit about like the lack of like out here is commercial rural zones. So same logic, at least with developing these proposed zoning rules, is planning's perspective was that a lot of the commercial rural is functionally also residential. So there was like I think one of the main kind of objectives is maintaining like some separation, although there's no buffer, right, between like a cannabis business and residences, because that would especially in like more dense areas, not necessarily out here, but in more dense areas, that would basically make it so businesses wouldn't be allowed anywhere, right? But there was a lot of consideration for at least having like not be on the same parcel, right? A business right next to a home. So I think that's where the reasoning, right? And I completely hear what you're saying, but just kind of want to give you some insights into like the process, the logic, the thinking process that kind of went into how we landed on these other zones. But yeah, that's how commercial, rural, and agricultural, because out here it's functionally residential in a lot of areas. So that could create obviously a lot of issues. So I just wanted to throw that out there to answer hopefully some of your questions.
Cool. Just quick, if you were going to go to any cannabis store in Los Angeles, there's residential closer than any of the people that are here in our neighborhood. So for planning to use that excuse, I think it's kind of weak and it's not really applicable to our area. So I think they hit the mark wrong. And if they really needed to know, planning needed to know, they have 4 councils here that they could easily try to reach out to see if our current structure would work or not work. Just because of a maybe or a might situation is not really how the reality or the picture actually looks down on the highway. So thank you for clarifying that. And if that was our local planners and whatnot, one of them do live here, and she is right about the businesses, and I can see that how her point would come through.
Yeah, I think it's generally just a concern that like you said, you allow A1, then it could be right next to like a or not necessarily, it could, like you're right, in LA there is dispensaries right next to homes. There's no buffers, right? Because if there was a buffer, once again, it would basically lead to a ban, right? But I think the concern is around having it at the very least on the same parcel of land, right? And that's where kind of like the line in the sand was sort of drawn. And I think with the outdoor cultivation, that came from like the early framework that was developed back in like 2017, 2018. I think a lot of the experiences of folks in unincorporated areas of the county has been with illegal businesses,
Yes.
right? And even then, that was like one of the big concerns is like you said, you don't want to live right next to the cannabis grows, right? A lot of folks don't. So that was just kind of carried over from that initial framework. So.
Okay,
a little insight.
I just have two more for you.
Now they just buy houses and fill them.
Yeah, they just buy the whole house from the neighborhood and just fill the house with grows now. That's. We probably have about 10 here in town. That's how they went from after the dual lights. And then they went to indoors. So they have enough capital, they can go and buy a whole house. They got the whole entire house down to studs. Open every wall that they can
I
up.
can
And
show you two on our street.
so it's.
Fire hazard, many other.
And that's the scary part. So if there's a way where they can't compete, we would prefer that.
Well, and that's part of the problem too, though, I mean, I'm all for the regulating the market, just like with alcohol, just like with anything else, cigarettes. However, so many hoops doesn't make it profitable, too expensive, makes it very profitable for the cartel.
So I got two more questions after that.
If I may add on to hers
Please
just
do.
a moment.
Please do.
I wonder what's the difference in the requirements of getting a license for cannabis as opposed to, say, a vape shop or a bar. So we're looking at nicotine or alcohol. If you make it more difficult for somebody to get a cannabis license, that's going to encourage the illegal grows. I mean, it's bad now. I had a friend who ran a vape shop who basically, because of the regulations, he had to shut down. So.
Yeah, that's
I mean, if you regulate somebody out of business, then what's the point of having any business? You know? So what's the point of legalization?
I guess what I'll say to that is you're right, and I'm not super familiar with like how an alcohol outlet might open up, but I do know that a lot of them have to go through a conditional use permit process, which can take like 12 months to like 4 years or something and cost like tens of thousands of dollars, right? So one of the main elements kind of this process is the ministerial approval process, which would kind of it would be a more streamlined process, less expensive. And that's why one of the big reasons we're doing a program, EIR, Environmental Impact Report, to really facilitate that ministerial process. That way we can identify all the potential impacts of this, make sure that we build in safeguards in the rules, and then there's no need to impose additional conditions, right? So that's one of the ways to kind of streamline this process. And we already know it could be a very a lot of folks could be against it, right? It could be a very kind of like, I don't have the word, but
It's like anything right now.
yeah,
It's
true.
controversial.
Yeah, controversial thing. And if you go through a CUP process, a lot of times these businesses might not even be able to open, right? So I guess kind of to your response, that's one of the ways to kind of lower the barrier a little bit for something that can be so controversial. So that's at least one tool that could be used to facilitate these businesses a little bit.
One thing I'll also add on as well is the Measure C actually has one of the lowest tax rates for businesses, and that was intentional because we know at the state level it's high. It's for businesses, and so we know taxes is a huge issue for cannabis businesses. So we were very intentional about making sure it's one of the lowest, sort of comparable to some of the lower.
I did recognize that when I went through it.
And then the last thing I think for enforcement, I think what we're trying to do is prioritize enforcement of the illicit market, just to make sure before and after we implement this ordinance that we're really cracking down on these businesses. So we're really advocating for additional resources for our county council and sheriff departments to make sure that they have enough resources. That's always an issue with those departments, to make sure that they're effective in their work. So we're really advocating for that at the moment.
Yeah, the second their money runs up, they stop busting anybody.
It's a huge problem.
And we had a big row behind the school
Yeah.
not too long ago, and they literally made it about 3/4 of the way through their harvest before they got popped. And then they got a slap on the wrist. They were out the next morning and they actually went and dusted off all the buds on the ground. The cops just threw on the ground, grinded it up and resold them to people. So Yeah, enforcement, I think is a very big, so if this creates funding to help enforcement of the illicit market, I think that's a benefit. And the illicit market here is not from the people here, say, it's from the people on that side of the mountain. You know, where they come over here and they exploit our one sheriff. They exploit that none of the neighbors really call on each other. They exploit a lot of that stuff, and a lot of people are starting to get sick, and yeah, phone calls are happening, but I could say that grow right in the middle of town probably had a good 30 calls on it. And then nothing happened.
Boy, could you smell it when they did their harvest?
And it was literally in the middle of town, you could smell the whole thing. And so, all right, my last two questions, and then I'll let this, I know this gentleman's been waiting for a minute, so. You guys talked about, and this is just more or less like kind of informing people, but the volatile extractions, you know, are allowed in buildings, and I think that's hands down a total manufacturing thing, and you need special equipment, and with those licenses that have been issued either with the city, and I don't think you've done with the county yet, is there safeguards the fire department have put in place, and is there like a standard model that's probably like, you check these 10 boxes, then yeah, you can have an explosive extraction process?
Yeah, great question.
It's a fire, we're in a fire zone, that's why
Yeah.
I brought it up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's actually a really great question. So, one of the kind of like, I think, unique positions of the county, is that not everything is being kind of built from scratch, right? Because the county contracts a lot of its services to, other cities. And, the fire department actually already has, they're called a special occupancy inspection unit, and it's devoted to just inspecting like these type of manufacturing facilities, the equipment that they use permitting, the equipment that they use that could be potentially dangerous if it's not like in proper working order, or if it's like not being used properly, or not for whatever reason, right? So there's already working with other like contract cities that currently regulate cannabis. So there's definitely like safeguards already in place. I think Albert mentioned like the regulation 30 that fire has, and that is basically all of their regulations that talk about like this type of equipment, you need this type of permit. And they do inspections of all of this equipment if it is like a volatile manufacturing or a cultivation facility. That's another one that uses kind of like specialized equipment, like carbon dioxide, right? They'll pump carbon dioxide into like a room so that the plants can grow like bigger. Obviously that could be very dangerous if somebody just walks into that. So they have like special approvals and inspections for that as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you for clearing that up. And the last thing on the list that you mentioned, but also had community members, is the county just gonna have a straight ban on any type of an event or consumption lounge?
It pretty much like, yeah, it'd be like the status quo currently banned. That wasn't proposed or approved by the board. We definitely don't want to get ahead of the board on that. So that is currently the how it would be, even with the launch of this program, not necessarily allowing any consumption lounges or events. That could always change. But right now, that's the proposed program.
And we do recognize we're behind on Pleasant County. So we know that consumption lounges, all of that might be more relevant at this point than retail. So I think once we launch, our goal is to make sure that once we launch this, to make sure that we are evaluating the current status, and then be able to then go back to the board with an additional recommendation for more permits and or the additional permits for specific other businesses, including events.
So like a round two,
Sorry?
you guys would come back for a round two.
Exactly.
You know,
Once
like
we
here we
reach that,
dipped our toes in the water,
Yeah.
and then now we're ready to release this
Yeah.
much more
Instead of
because.
just taking us this long to get here, right? We want to make sure we're doing it right and that we are being mindful of the process. So we hear you though, and we hear the industry, and we know that we're behind.
Okay, well, I'm not trying to rub or anything. I just want to make sure, like, you know, like we made our
Absolutely.
the comments came out. So that's all I have.